right. Well, good morning. Welcome to Leadership Begins with Listening. I'm Kyle Pipes. As people continue to log on, I'm just going to give a little bit of an introduction about myself. So I am a Binghamton University graduate. I went to the School of Management. Upon graduation, I spent 6 months in a prison in Maine, not because I was incarcerated, but because I was working with Siemens, and it was a new prison that was being built, and I was helping with their energy management system. I spent about 5 years selling energy projects to hospitals and universities, as well as municipalities and manufacturing. From there, I decided it was time for a second chapter, and so I went off to seminary and became a pastor. And since then, I have moved into this world of coaching and consulting, and I work with organizations to help them build healthy culture. Currently, I'm deeply involved with Hahn Welding Supply and Sidearm Sports, and now I am a new training partner with MACNY and excited to participate. I have been remarried, and between the two of us, we have 6 kids, 2 in college, 2 in high school, and 2 in middle school, so we like to keep that hopping. I am a basketball junkie, an avid cook, and a regular but mediocre golfer. So that's all about me, and I hope that our time together today is helpful for you. The goal will be 3 things. One, it's to give you some teaching, just some reminders about how to be a good listener. 2, we're going to do some breakout groups that allow us to apply that material. And then 3, at MACNY, we're always interested in connecting you to one another. And so in the breakout groups, that'll give you a chance to maybe meet somebody new, another cool person meeting a cool person. All right, well, let's get started. So I love this scene from The Darkest Hour, in which Winston Churchill is attempting to figure out what to do, because all of the political powers around him are pressuring him to concede to Germany's demands and to allow Italy to negotiate some sort of truce. But along with that, there'll be much given in. And Winston Churchill does not believe that that's the right move, and he does not trust Germany or Italy. Wise man. But everyone else is against him, and so he feels so uncertain about what to do. And he makes this move, at least as it's shown in the movie, and he goes into the subway system, into the train system. And there's this great moment in which he's sitting in the midst of the train car, and all the people around him begin to realize that Winston Churchill is right there. The Prime Minister of England is there in their car with them. And so he begins to explain the situation, and he says to the people, "What should I do?" And they begin to encourage him to not give in, to fight, that they're willing to go the long road, and they're willing to pay the price of whatever it takes because they believe in the cause. And so that gives Winston what he needs to go and empowers him to lead the country. Now, none of us are Winston Churchill, and most of us, though maybe there's a person or two on here and we don't know yet, will go down in history as a potentially influential great leader. But I do know this, is that we're all leading somewhere. You're maybe leading an organization, you're leading your team, you're leading in your family. And in order to lead well, we have to become good listeners. Leadership begins with listening. And I think the reason why is leaders are always trying to build a community that has a purpose. And when we think about community, community has a few different factors. People are connected to one another, both relationally and emotionally, and that requires listening. And if we aren't able to connect to our people, then how will we care for them? How will we know them? How will we be able to laugh with them? If we aren't good listeners, we won't be able to accomplish that. Secondly, as we lead, it's a community with a cause or a purpose. And so in order to have a collective cause, a collective purpose, it requires us to listen. Because leaders who don't have anyone following them are just going on a walk by themselves. And so what we need to do as leaders is figure out how to hear our people, to understand where they are, to understand where they want to go, so that we can help the team coalesce. Now, a few years ago, I read this quote, and I think it's a game changer. Here's what it says. It says that being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. I'm going to say that again. Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. And here's the thing that perhaps in a moment you can know this right away. When you have something that you want to tell someone important and you try to tell them and you feel like they don't hear you, it hurts. And you walk away and maybe you give up, maybe you're discouraged, maybe you get angry. Whatever your response is, it's because in that moment, you might not say this, but in that moment, you feel like you have not been loved. And so when we understand that that's the implication of being a good listener or a poor listener, I think it gives us an appropriate motivation to always want to lean in as best as we can. Because the team that we're leading, if they don't feel heard by us, they too will feel unloved. Now, secondly, we have a problem, you and I. And the problem is this, that often we listen to make ourselves heard instead of listening to hear others. I'm going to say that again. So we listen to make ourselves heard instead of listening to others. I'm going to throw out a few different personality types that sort of reflect this. So there's what I call the segue artist. And this person, anything you say to them is just a bridge or a transition for them to tell you about something that's true for them. You know, so you talk about how you've had a difficult week. My week's been so challenging. You wouldn't believe what happened at work today. And they say, I know, but listen to this. And so they begin talking about it in that way. Secondly, and I think that perhaps as leaders, this is one where we fall in more often than not, and it's the strategist. We're listening in order to find ways to convince people, to lead people, to send people in different directions. And so in this way, what we're listening for is just an opportunity and an advantage, some information that we can use to get what we want heard. Of course, there's the comedian who is just listening for an opportunity to make a joke so that the room can feel good. And then finally, I think there's like the noise canceller. They're always just thinking about what they're thinking about. And no matter what you say, that is canceled out by the noise in their own head. I think it's important for us to identify and understand what kind of listener we might be, because if we want to change it, we have to own it first. So that's the point of today, is that I want to go through 4 things that I think if you remember, you will be a better listener for your team and that your team will feel heard. The first is that we want to commit to being interested and not interesting. As I was talking about in the last way, a lot of times we listen so that we can say something that seems interesting. Second, we want to tune into them. When people are speaking, it's not just the information that's being relayed, it's their thoughts, it's their feelings, it's even their personhood. And so how do we connect with that? Thirdly, we want to engage by exploring and empathizing. And I'll give us some tips on how to do that. And then finally, to remind us that listening is a whole body exercise. We want to think with our head, our shoulders, our knees, and our toes. All right. So be interested, not interesting. As I said, I got my start in sales. And so there's a movie from 20 years ago called Big Kahuna. And the story takes place out in Kansas, I believe. And Danny DeVito and Kevin Spacey are these industrial lubricant salespeople. And the whole movie is about how they go to this hotel and they hold a sales meeting and conference, and they're looking for the big kahuna, this big sale that's going to change their year. And along the way, they sort of talk about life and challenges. And there's this new young guy, the tech person that's there as sort of like the sales assist. And he's sort of going around and he's having all these challenges. And at one point in the movie, he says, one of the older guys says, as soon as you lay your hands on a conversation, you're a marketing rep. You're not a human being. Ask someone about their kids, their dreams, just to know. And so this is a reminder to us that often we have an agenda with our listening and we want to put our agenda aside. Now, to do this with our team, I think we have to do three things. First, you have to check your ego. Listening is a form of servanthood. And in order to do that, we have to say, okay, I'm going to lay aside my stuff. Secondly, we need to resist the urge to reflectively add value. In order to listen to someone else, we have to pause, hear what they have to say, interact with it, maybe ask some follow-up questions to really get clarity on what someone's saying, to bounce it off of them. And I think that one of the tools, and I think you can begin using that this week, and you can email me and let me know what you think of it. One phrase that I think can be so powerful is just the phrase, tell me more. So when someone comes into your office and says, hey, I have this idea, let's have a luncheon party. And in your mind, you're like, that's a dumb idea. I don't want to do that. Say, tell me more. And that tell me more is just a way to continue to engage people and have it drawn out. Tell me more. Tell me more about that. Tell me why you want to do that. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me how you came up with that idea. And that little phrase, tell me more, helps us be interested instead of pursuing this idea that we could be interesting. All right. Secondly, what we want to do is we want to tune in to people. So I'm a Yankees fan, and one of the things that I like to do is I like to listen to baseball on the radio. It has sort of that old-timey feel to it. It's also good for a nap on a Sunday afternoon. And so it's this chance to just sort of sit and listen. And when we think about engaging with other human beings, one of the things that's really important is we have to remember we have to tune into them. So think of that as a radio station. If you're not quite on the right place, it's fuzzy. You can't hear it. But when you are able to, you can tune in, and tuning in gets you a sense of clarity. Now, one of the things we have to do in order to tune into others, we have to tune out of ourselves, that inner dialogue that's always running, the to-do list that maybe you have to get done, the objective that you're trying to achieve, whatever that might be. You have to tune out of that and tune into the other person. Now, one of the things that I think is really important is that when we tune into someone and we hear them, it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with everything they say. It just means that we understand where they're coming from. We have empathy. We've put ourselves in their shoes, and we're able to clearly reflect and articulate what they're thinking, what they're feeling, why they're motivated to say what they're saying. And this is your second tip that I think is really helpful. The way that you check to see if you are tuned in is reflective listening. So it's not just about restating exactly what they say. They just said what they said. So to just do that back is in some ways awkward and weird. But what's helpful is to restate in a different way to see if you understand what they said. Maybe you might offer up that they feel something, and that gives them a chance to either confirm that that's how they feel or readdress what you are saying. Maybe you say, hey, so what I'm understanding is you're thinking X, Y, and Z. Is that right? And they say, yeah, that's right. And you say, well, why are you so passionate about that? And that's the kind of reflective listening I'm talking about, to test whether you're tuned in to the person you are communicating with. So let's imagine that an employee comes into you with a problem, or a colleague, and they are really upset, they're frustrated, and maybe in this simple situation that happened with one of my clients a few weeks ago, they went into a client and they made a pitch for a new deal and an opportunity. And then someone else in the company had someone who was related, and they came in and sort of took the deal away. And so they come and they're like, hey, this isn't right. This isn't fair. Now, what we want to do is we want to say, okay, so time out. Let me get this right. So what you're saying is, hey, so-and-so came in. We'll call this person Judy. Judy came in and sort of stole this sale from you. Is that right? Yes. Well, tell me about that. Why do you think that happened? What do you think they're feeling? What makes you so frustrated about this? And then that allows us to sort of make this person feel heard. And so what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to then sort of move to this place of solution. Now, it might be that the solution you desire and the solution they desire is not the same, but if they feel heard, they are more likely to accept the outcome. This is a fascinating thing that Volvo discovered in the midst of customer service, that when people called to complain about something that had happened with their vehicle, that as long as they felt heard, even if they didn't necessarily agree with the outcome, their brand loyalty increased. And so that feeling of being heard is so close to that feeling of being loved that if we can do that, we've gone a long way. All right. Well, I've talked for a little bit, and I'm not always a fan of talking heads myself. And so I think it's time for you all to get a chance to interact with one another. And so you're going to get randomly assigned to a different group. I would encourage you to have your camera and microphone on. And you're going to do a couple things. One, so it's only 8 minutes. So this is lightning round. Give a quick introduction of yourself. And then I want you to answer these questions. What prevents you from tuning in? And you can say it in any way, but are you a person who gets stuck in their head? Are you maybe more task focused? Maybe you believe in the lie of multitasking, and so that you're always doing more than one thing. Maybe it's just a sense of too busy. Maybe you're a person who's often just very focused. And so when someone comes in with something, you're focused on whatever it was you were talking about. Then secondly, I want you to identify, when do you feel like you succeed at being a good listener? When do you tend to be interested instead of interesting? When do you tend to really succeed at tuning in? Because if you can identify where you're already succeeding, then you can think about, how do I scale that? How do I multiply that? And then maybe it's something about your own health. Maybe you just notice that if you're sleeping and exercising, you're a better listener because you have some emotional bandwidth. And then finally, what are some changes that you could make to help yourself? Based off of the couple of things we've just talked about, what are some changes you could make to better tune in to others and be interested instead of trying to be interesting? Because the systems that we're currently using are getting the results that we're getting. And unless we're able to identify a place of change, we can't do that. All right, so there we go. There's going to be 6 of you in a group. We're going to have 8 minutes. And because this is only an hour long, at 8 minutes, you will come back to me, interact and engage on those questions. And then we'll continue on this morning. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Hey, so during the break, I learned that I was sharing the presenter view versus just the slide, so I apologize about that. But I suppose what you also got was a preview of my notes, and so that's helpful, I suppose. All right, so we're going to continue on as people trickle back in. And so we're focused this morning on listening so others feel heard, and we've talked about how we want to be interested and not interesting. And we want to tune into others. Remember that radio dial. You want to tune into their thoughts, feelings, emotions, their ideas. And third, what we want to do is we want to engage by exploring and empathizing. So when we think about this, engagement itself reflects value. If I have something to say and you engage me, it makes me feel loved. It makes me feel like the thing that I'm doing or saying or thinking or feeling or wrestling with might be interesting to you, but mostly it's about its worth. It's saying, hey, okay, I care, I'm engaged. Secondly, we want to explore. So I think that the idea of exploring when it relates to listening is so important, because what it does is it allows us to help a person clarify what they might be thinking and feeling, but that it also allows us to engage and hear them. So I'm a big fan of the show Ted Lasso, and I think that if you were looking for something to do this weekend and you wanted to grow as a leader, you could just watch the first 2 seasons of that on Apple TV Plus, and it would take you a long way. But there's this great scene in which he sort of sandbags the past owner of this football club into a game of darts. And the game's on the line, and they've made a big wager. And he talks about how when he was a kid, he always didn't understand why he was misunderstood or picked on. And then talks about how he sees this quote from Walt Whitman that says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And he starts to go through all the questions that this other fellow should have asked, or that Ted would have asked if he was operating in this place of being curious versus judgmental. And I think that often, because we are so passionate about our own thoughts and ideas, that we struggle to be curious about the thoughts and ideas of others. And so what we want to do to be good listeners, to help them feel heard, is we want to just explore. We want to explore by asking questions and thinking about what it is that they might be trying to communicate. Then what we want to do is we want to empathize. So great listeners don't just hear the words, they feel the words. Now, confessionally, this has always been a challenge for me. I tend to operate more out of my head than my emotions, or that's at least how I grew up. And so I spent a lot of time working on, how do I feel? If this person feels sad, how do I match that feeling? If this person feels frustrated, how do I allow myself to feel frustrated as well? And then here's an important piece, is that in order to listen well to others, I think that the quality of questions we ask controls the quality of answers we get. My daughter, Charlotte, who's a 7th grade middle school girl, can be particularly challenging to listen to. Why? Because she prefers flat, one-word answers. How was your day? Good. Well, what was your favorite part? I didn't have one. Tell me something that was interesting. There was nothing interesting, Dad. It was boring. And so at this point, all the questions I've asked have not returned anything that allow me to really engage with. And so I've begun to ask different things. Tell me about how you felt during lunch. And when I ask her that, she can't just say nothing. I suppose she could, but after I've committed to this, she begins to start to say, well, I felt pretty good today because I got to sit with my friends, or I felt sad because there was a 6-person table and I was the 7th one and I showed up. And then it gives me a chance to engage with her. And so whether it's with your family members or with your employees, you have to think about, what kind of questions are you asking? And the better questions you can ask, the better answers you'll get. And that, in that sharing process, will enable someone to feel heard. Now, a lot of times I think what we do is we buzz through the week. We don't have pre-thought out questions that we want to ask. And so what I'm going to do right now is send you back into your groups, and you are going to work together. And what I want you to do is I want you to create 5 questions that you think would be good questions, be helpful for a weekly check-in with your one-on-one direct reports. And after you create those 5 questions, I want you to stick them in the chat. And so this is a group exercise, not an individual exercise. So 5 questions. The benefit of this, twofold. 1, you're going to be thinking about the questions. Hopefully you'll take them home with you. And 2, you get to hear some of the questions that other people ask. And this might give you some new ideas as you lead this week. So Kelly's going to send us off into the group, and in your group, you're going to create 5 questions that you think would be helpful for a weekly check-in with one of your direct reports. Okay, I think we're all back, and welcome back. Hopefully that exercise was helpful for you. We are recording this, and so the entirety of this will be sent out to everyone after we're able to clean it up. So if you join us a little bit late, you will not miss out. You can follow up and check it out. And for those of you who are like, I missed what Kyle said in that part, you'll get to see that as well. All right, so we've talked about how listening to others is so important, because when people feel heard, they feel loved. And that experience as human beings is so close that we can't distinguish them. And so we want, as leaders, to be able to listen so others feel heard. We've looked at to commit to be interested versus interesting. We've talked about how we want to tune in to their thoughts, feelings, emotions, dreams. We want to engage by exploring and empathizing. And then this last part is perhaps the most sticky idea you have, because my guess is that every single one of you can sing head, shoulders, knees, and toes with me. Head, shoulders, knees, and toes, eyes and ears, mouth and nose, head, shoulders, knees, and toes. And I think that this is a great thing for us to remember when we're thinking about how do we be good listeners, because listening is not just something that happens through our ears. It's not just something that happens in our mind, but it's really a whole body exercise. And so we want to train ourselves to listen with everything. So when we think about the head, we want to think about first, we want our head, our mental space, to be tuned in. And a lot of the ways we can do that is through eye contact, it's through tilting our head, nodding our head. These are things that we can offer back to people. One of my favorite books is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And they look at different leaders who create outstanding culture. And one of the things that they noticed about leaders is it's not those who have a lot to say, but it's often those who sort of go around, are able to engage people one-on-one, ask good questions, just like we talked about. And often what they found was that a slight nod of the head, a tilt of the head, and encouragement was something that propelled many of their people forward, especially in the area of creativity. So with many of the people I work with, how do I help my people be more creative? Well, listening is going to help your people be more creative, because that's going to offer up connection. And when people feel safe, that's when they're actually the most creative. When people feel listened to, they feel safe. And so that's what we're doing here today. Eye contact is so important. When you feel like someone is listening to you, it's because they see into you. And I think there's a real difference between when we're talking to someone and we're looking over their head or we're looking down at our notes. There's something about it that feels like there's a hiddenness to all of it, or that there's a lack of engagement. So we want to remember, are we making eye contact, even in the moments which could be uncomfortable? I think in the midst of a difficult conversation, our willingness to be vulnerable enough to maintain eye contact is going to make someone feel heard in a unique way. Next is posture. So if we're in a conversation, we want to think about, does our posture match the tone of the conversation? And so if someone's saying something important, are we leaning in? Are our elbows maybe on our knees because we want to hear? If it's something that is painful, are we allowing our body to reflect that? Maybe sort of echo or reflect the sadness that's being done, or the frustration, and are you allowing your body to feel that? And then finally, when we think about head, shoulders, knees, and toes, it's really is at certain points, I think listening requires us to stand up. We've heard something, and so we stand up because we're either very excited about it or we're outraged by it. But allow it to be something that your whole body is participating in. Because if it's not, then we're not sending the message that we want to send, that we're fully engaged in what the person has to say, that we care about what they have to say, that they're valuable, that we want to engage them. And while this might, in the short term, feel like it takes more time, energy, and effort, in the long term, you will succeed, because you will succeed as a leader in creating a community that cares for one another, that is connected to one another, and has unity and clarity around your common cause. And if you can't listen well as a leader and help others in your organization listen well, you will never achieve those goals. All right, one more exercise, and then we'll come back for a final summary. And this is personal reflection, because it's so important for us to engage. So which of the four that I've talked about could you most benefit from developing? So is it tuning in? Is it engaging through empathy? Is it head, shoulders, knees, and toes? Is it reminding yourself, oh, I want to be interested, not try to be interesting? Which one of those four is it for you? Then what are some concrete actions you want to take to prompt you? So for all of us, we do what our habits have dictated. I'm a big habit person because, as a Duke study says, 40% of what we do in any given day is actually done out of habit and routine. And so the truth is, when you hang up from this, you will go and you will listen as you've always listened, unless you put some things in your way that make you do something different. Specific thing that I find helpful is just adding to my calendar at 1 o'clock after lunch, something that pings up and says, "Are you listening well today?" And then that just sort of reminds me, brings me back to how I want to be. And then I want you to think through how you might create better listening in your meetings and just sort of offer that up as a reflection. When you think about meetings, how might you create more listening in there? And so again, you're going to break out, you get 8 minutes, you have this conversation, probably won't be complete, but offer these things up and then we'll come back for a summary. Kelly, you can send us off. Thank you so much. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope that our time together today has been helpful. I can tell by the questions that you all generated and added to the chat that this is something that you've given some thought about. And so I want to offer up a couple things to you in closing. First, I know that you are completely capable of being the kind of listener that you desire to be, and you wouldn't be on something like this if you didn't desire it to begin with. But I want to encourage you in two ways. One, I want to affirm your desire to continue to grow in it, because my experience is listening is never something that we've fully arrived at. There's always something a little bit more that we can gain. And I want to encourage you that as a leader. Second, you probably have a ton of things on your plate and you're doing a lot of different things, and you've sort of thought about, like, okay, what's time management and how are goals and what's my strategy, and all those things are super important, and I teach them and I encourage them. But one thing that I've noticed recently, and I think it's really helpful, is to think about, what are you giving your attention to? And honestly, when we think about listening, it's really, what are we giving our attention to? Are we giving our attention to the person in front of us, or are we giving our attention to the 1,000 other things that are trying to demand it in that very moment? And if we want to be the kind of leaders that I know that you want to be, then we have to be good listeners. And so my hope for you this week is that you have identified some action, some success that you've had, that you're able to replicate, that you're able to lean in, so that you can be the kind of leader that helps people feel heard, because ultimately they'll feel loved, and you will succeed at creating a community with a purpose, which is what you are all about. Hey, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for offering me your time. I'm grateful for it. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to me, my email is kyle@kylepipes.com. I'm always excited to meet a new person, even just for coffee. So again, feel free to reach out about anything. In September, I will be leading a 2-day training at the MACNY offices, the 4 cornerstones of leading great culture. If you're interested in that, would love to have you join me. And with that, we have reached our 10 o'clock hour. And so I hope that you all have a wonderful week. And I look forward to meeting you in person soon. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.